Welcome to Rockhampton with Nyree Johnson, the podcast that celebrates the people, places, and stories that make Rocky and the wider central Queensland community extraordinary. I firmly believe we're sitting on a golden goose in this region, and I love meeting the people who are doing the quiet work behind the scenes to keep the community thriving. They run our sports clubs, they organise our charities, they support the people who are lost in the system, and they volunteer their time so generously. And I feel like the luckiest person in the world when someone shares their story with me privately. And now I'm privileged to bring their stories and achievements to you, the listeners of Rockhampton with Nyree Johnson. Sometimes they wonder why they were asked, thinking that what they're doing and what they've done is not that big of a deal. And I can hand on heart tell you that it absolutely is. Other times, my guests are ecstatic to be asked, and they look forward to sharing a piece of their Rocky and Central Queensland story. Thank you for listening in. I truly appreciate you being here. Today's guest is Jo Leveritt, and Jo comes to us from the Wide Bay region. So yes, this is Rockhampton with Nyree Johnson, but Jo's impact spreads far and wide, and not only in her own community in the Wide Bay region, but also across Queensland and Australia. And across this podcast today, we're going to be learning about the work that she does, the initiatives that she's got coming up, and a little bit about her story. So as the Chief Executive Officer of Wide Bay Advocacy, this organisation is a respected, community-driven organisation that strengthens the rights, voices and lived experiences of vulnerable people across the Wide Bay region through advocacy, community engagement and, of course, policy influence. The organisation and the work that you do, Jo, you create fair and equitable outcomes for individuals and groups facing barriers. And that is not a space that a lot of people are exposed to or familiar with. And I'm really, really excited to have you here on the podcast because you are a frequent visitor to Rockhampton. And as I mentioned, the work that you do does span far and wide, and it's much, much bigger than your own organisation, your own region, sorry. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Nyree. What a lovely warm welcome too. Thank you.
You are very welcome, very much deserved, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with the guests, with the listeners, about your work and what drives you and your story. Because I've been lucky enough to have heard it before in a couple of different forums, and I think it's just one that needs to be shared. But before we really get stuck into it, I am curious to know, if you could be an expert at anything at all in the world, what would it be and why?
Oh my goodness, what a question. Look, I think, you know what, I would like to be an expert in international human rights. Now, I don't know if that's obscure, but it's something that may not happen in my career, but it's something that I am very interested in. And I suppose it's a little obscure, if you like, because there's not, in my opinion, there's not a broad general community understanding of what happens overseas, what happens internationally, and particularly in a human rights context. And I have been exposed to some of the issues through my own learnings of it, my interest in it. It flows sort of naturally from the work that I do here in Australia, of course. And I have also been exposed to it through my membership of Zonta. So I've been with Zonta for quite some time, and I know, Nyree, you're also a member of Zonta. It's a powerful group,
Yes.
community group, and has been around for decades. And its goal, of course, is to strengthen opportunities for women and girls internationally, and there's clubs all around the world. So through my membership and my interest in Zonta, I have learnt about a lot of international work that is done not just by Zonta, but also by Rotary and some other organisations. So I suppose to answer your question, if I was going to be an expert in something obscure, I think obscure from the point of view that it's not something that a lot of people have interest in or knowledge of. But for me, I would love to step into that next stage of my career for doing something in the international space with human rights, and maybe even coming from a gendered lens, which is an area that interests me as well. We know that we're very lucky in our country. You know, we do talk about the gender pay gap, and we do talk about inequities, gender-based violence, those sort of things. But in comparison to other countries, we're actually quite well advanced. It doesn't mean there isn't work done, but we are a lot more advanced. And there is still, particularly in countries where there is war, where there are natural disasters, where there's famine, etc., women and girls are disproportionately affected. So that's an area that I would love to be an expert in.
I love that, and it fits quite perfectly, of course, with the work that you do and the passion projects that you participate in, and both in a volunteer and a paid capacity, of course. And I absolutely agree. Obscure in the fact that, it's not familiar or comfortable for a lot of people to want to work in that space, and you jump in head first, you go all in. And in my opinion, which of course this podcast is filled with my opinions, but I just think that people like you are so needed in the world, because not everybody can do this work, and those who can should. You are, of course, the Chief Executive Officer of Wide Bay Advocacy, and a person doesn't get there by just waking up one day and thinking, hey, that is the job I'm going to do. So I'm very curious if you can share key moments, people, experiences across your life that have influenced the path that you've taken and the work that you do.
All right. Well, I might answer that question in two parts, personal and professional. So personally, I have probably always had an interest in, I have had an interest in the law and systems of government domestically, right through my schooling. And in fact, interesting fact about me, in I think it was grade 11, and this will show my age. In grade 11, my parents were friends with a barrister who was involved in the Jack Herbert, Jerry Bellino trials, which were happening in Queensland. And that was in relation to corruption, and it was sort of the post-Bajocki-Peterson era. And through my parents' connection with him, he gave me the opportunity to come and sit with him and be an observer in those hearings in the Supreme Court in Brisbane. So I spent my grade 11 school holidays in the Supreme Court watching the most, a really groundbreaking case. And it probably, so I suppose what I'm saying is, that was a few decades ago, and that was when my interest was sparked. And I thought, this is an interest that I have. I'm enjoying this. This doesn't feel like, work. This is, I'm happy to spend my to learn. So personally, I had that early exposure, and I ended up moving into the publics. I did a little bit of, after I got my degrees, I went and worked in local government, and then I worked in state government for quite some time. So I had exposure there to government bureaucracy, public service works, and that was incredible experience. So moving into the professional, and fast track a few decades, and I had been in the public service for quite a while and worked my way up to a position where I was comfortable, and COVID hit. So we're talking about 3 or 4 years ago now. And that's what sparked an interest in moving into the not-for-profit sector, which it was a huge career move for me. And what triggered it was the COVID experience. And I think for a lot of people that time, yes, it was very difficult, but in many ways it got us to consider our mortality. And it got us to consider our purpose in life. And it gave us, generally speaking, an opportunity to pivot. And in so many different ways. It could be, for some people, that might be pivoting, making decisions with their relationships. For some, it might be pivoting in terms of their business and having to adopt a different method of reaching their customers. And you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, because you are a small business owner yourself, and probably experiencing that pivoting as we all did. For me,
and just a couple of years into.
Yes. Wow, incredible. So still, yes. And, I think that taught us a lot of skills. We learned how to adapt. And for me, the pivot came with my career. And during COVID, I saw here on the ground the impacts of COVID and access to digital technology. And for people who were disadvantaged, and I'm speaking probably primarily in relation to people that are homeless, how they couldn't access the justice system during lockdown. And that had a flow-on effect to them because they weren't able to exercise their legal rights. They weren't able to participate in the justice system. When the courts were in lockdown and moved to video conferencing and those type of things, if you're street present or even couch surfing, or in circumstances that you find yourself in and you don't have a phone, you don't have a computer, you don't have a printer, you don't even have a fixed address to have copies of documents, your disadvantage is compounded. So I witnessed that, and how I witnessed it was I was volunteering at the soup kitchen, which I'd been doing for a long time. And at the soup kitchen, of course, we provide meals to the homeless. And during that time, the homeless would come up to the servery and would have a bit of a conversation. And this is where I was hearing stories about people who are street present who were deciding it's all too hard. I'm either not going to participate at all and just see what happens, or I'm just going to find a way of pleading guilty, even if they may have had a defence. And that didn't sit comfortably with me. So that was the turning point. It was really just that experience. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to take some leave from my job and I'm going to see where this might take me. So I was very supportive and I was able to take some long service leave and I took some time, and I also reduced my hours to part-time to see where this might take me. Anyway, fast forward, and I'm now running a legal practice for people in this area who are street present or who are at risk of homelessness, and also White Bay Advocacy, which is the systemic side of advocacy I do.
Yes, that is incredible. That is such a powerful story. Thank you for sharing it. I do agree, so many people pivoted and changed the way they approach the world when COVID happened for lots of different reasons and in lots of different categories of life, whether it be work, family, friends, where you live even, how you live. It was such a pivotal moment in time. Very, very challenging to go through, of course, and even more challenging for those who are disadvantaged. And I guess for someone like myself who, and I don't mean to be rude or disrespectful, but I completely didn't even consider what it would have been like during COVID or lockdown for people who didn't have a home or who were couch surfing or were trying to navigate the legal system. I was too busy trying to work from home and school 3 children to be thinking. And then, of course, a business that was 3 years old that was trying to go, hang on, what happens now? So, yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Thank you so much for sharing it. I, for one, am glad you are where you are. As I said when I introduced you, we need people like you in the world who are exceptionally good at what you do, and you feel called to do this work and you show up with such authenticity. And it honestly is quite a privilege to know you, Jo, and to watch your story evolve over time and even hear you speak at different events and, of course, on this podcast. So, and when I mentioned before, you're in the Wide Bay region, you're in the Bundaberg area, but, it's just down the road from Rocky. And the work that you do sets a precedent for the rest of regional Queensland and regional Australia.
Well, thank you. Look, I love living in regional Australia, and yet I now have some very strong connections in Rockhampton, including yourself, of course. And I think a lot of that has been because of my membership with the Triple R Women Network. What an amazing group of women.
Incredible group, yes.
Triple R, of course, is the regional rural remote women's group that you and I are both members of. And that has really extended my circle and my network, which has been incredible. So, and of course, I'm going to be in Rockhampton just in a few days' time, and I've been there a few times this year. So, you know, I'm regularly out and about in some of those places, which is wonderful. But I love the experience of living in regional Queensland. I grew up in Brisbane. I'm a Brisbane.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I did know that now that you say that. I think I remember you saying that at the International Women's Day event that you spoke at.
So I was born in Brisbane, raised in Brisbane. My family is still there. And I did all of my schooling in Brisbane. I then did my first degree in Brisbane, and it was a job opportunity that came up here on a temporary basis. And I thought, I'll give it a go. And then I have ended up staying. That was in around about 2012, I think it was 2013. And I haven't left. Nyree, what that has given me is experience of both how decisions are made in the metropolitan area and the southeast Queensland, and how decisions are made in regional and remote Queensland. And I'll tell you what, it's quite different. And if you've got the ability to have if you've had the benefit of the experience, which has been so fortunate for me to work in both, you can almost tailor your messaging and your connections accordingly.
Yes, absolutely agree. And I really don't like the us versus them mentality, because I think, that serves no purpose really. But sometimes it does make me incredibly frustrated that decisions are made that suit and are made in Southeast Queensland for the rest of the state, and it's not a plug and play model. I did have the opportunity to live in Brisbane for about, I think it was 6 years in total, and I opted to come home. So I was down there in my early 20s and mid to late 20s, and then I came home, and I've not regretted it for a second. But I absolutely do appreciate the experience of seeing both sides of the coin, and working for big corporate organisations helps that as well. And of course, corporate organisations that span either the state or the country, which is what I've had the opportunity to do. And I find being in Rocky now, it's that more advocacy space. Well, that's a fantastic idea. That's going to work in Southeast Queensland. That is not going to work in Rockhampton, and probably won't work in Townsville. But I can't tell you that because I don't live in Townsville. So go and ask the people that live there.
That's right. And would you agree with me, having those networks like through Zonta and Triple R Women has, enables people like you and I who are sort of, in our community doing quite a lot of work, helps us to get into some of not get into those communities. What am I trying to say? Like we're connected with them, so we can get some reliable information and credible information, or they can help us with sharing a message or a story. I think that's unique. I did not experience that and I still don't, in some of the work I do down in Brisbane, because I'm there regularly. It's very different. Yes. It's a different type of networking to what I see here. Do you think so too?
I do. And I think the special thing about being involved in community work, especially as a volunteer or as an advocate, is that everybody is there because they want to be there. So that collaboration tends to happen a little more freely, that knowledge sharing, that networking. I even notice it with Scouts. Like I could go anywhere in Queensland or Australia really and turn up at a Scout den and have a friend, if I was really stuck. Same with Zonta. Zonta does the same thing. Same with the CWA, which I'm also a member of. And, everybody wants to be there. You're not there because you've got to pay your mortgage. You're there because you've got a love for the community that you live in, and you want to make an impact, and you want to leave this world better than the way you found it.
Yeah, well said. Totally agree.
Yeah, no, fabulous. Well, we've talked a lot about what's inspired your current journey and your path. You do have another initiative coming up that, it's just started to be hinted at on socials. I'd love you to share us a little bit about it, which is Leveritt Advocacy, and what that path looks like for the future.
Nyree, it's still a work in progress, but the idea, well, first of all, the name Leveritt is a take off my surname, Leveritt.
Yes.
And the Latin resemblance is for lifting people up. So that's where Leveritt as a name has come from. And I can't take credit for it. I got some advice from the lovely Karen Osario from Brand for Profit, and she helped me work through some names. But I love it. And she does fabulous work.
Yes.
But anyway, that's the name. And the concept is about lifting the standard of advocacy in, hopefully, the country. Now, there's a lot of people who call themselves advocates. It's easy to call yourself an advocate. Anyone can be an advocate. That's my belief. They really can.
Yes.
What is the point of difference, though, is your ability to effectively advocate and to achieve results. So Where I see a gap is we've got this cohort of people who call themselves advocates, and you and I are advocates as well. And then you have lawyers, and particularly solicitors, for example, who advocacy is their specialisation. And I'm actually a solicitor advocate. I've been trained as a solicitor advocate, which has some advanced level experience in the legal advocacy on top of what a solicitor does. So where I see a gap is you've got this fabulous set of skills that the legal profession attain through their education, through their practice, through their networking. Many of those skills in advocacy could be transferable to the cohort that I was describing before, who are maybe community advocates, social justice advocates, community connectors, people in their community who use their voice or use whatever communication style they have. It doesn't have to be their voice. People can communicate in all sorts of different ways, as you would appreciate. So what I would like to do is develop some competency training, some frameworks that will assist people who are really passionate and interested in advocacy, lift that skill set to an advanced level and have a competitive edge. And that may not necessarily be about profit. It could be you have a competitive edge in the not-for-profit sector because you have really honed in on your advocacy skills, your communication, how you work your messaging, and how you use your influence. Who are your connectors? How do you keep your connectors engaged? How do you approach decision makers? So there's quite a lot of skill and strategy when it comes to advocacy. So that's a long way of me saying I'm working on Leveritt Advocacy, which will be the platform by which I am going to design and develop some tools, some training, some competency, a framework to lift the standard of advocacy to a high level in this country.
I am so in love with this project.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
Yes, absolutely. That is going to be a game changer. Even I can see the gap in the market, and I don't work in this space. So, being able to teach and train and upskill people in how to effectively advocate and achieve outcomes is something I enjoy doing in parallel with actual advocacy work, but it's not my specialty. It's just I happen to have a skill set and I can, share with people along the way. But having the structure and the framework and a platform to leverage, that is going to be a game changer. I can imagine there are going to be a lot of community organisations, not-for-profits, that will be using this sort of framework.
I hope so. I do see the gap, and I enjoy advocacy, and I have learned, probably like you too, we learn as we go, don't we? I mean, we use different tools from our toolkit where when we're trying to influence decision makers, and sometimes they work, sometimes we go back and reflect and think, I wonder why that didn't work. I need to try something different. So it's all of those learnings I would love to share, but also quite selfishly, I also want to learn from other advocates because collectively we can lift our voices and lift our influence.
Yes, absolutely agree. Also a very big fan of learning from other people, even when they don't realise they're teaching me. It's one of my favourites.
Yes. None of us know everything about everything.
Correct. Yes. And I really love, and I absolutely imagine you would be the same. I love to be in rooms where I'm not the smartest person.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because that is my most favourite event when I'm in a room like that and I can learn and absorb and just, again, selfishly, same as yourself, just learn to be better tomorrow.
Everyone has a story. Everyone has something. You can be sitting at going to an event and sitting, you're sitting in a place, and actually this happens to me all the time.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit before about, that transition from Brisbane to regional Queensland. And quite often, as I did, people go from regional Queensland to Brisbane and they either stay there or they come back. Now, I often ask my guests, what does being in the Rockhampton region mean to you? What does community contribution mean to you? But for you, it's, what does your community mean to you and the community of Bundaberg and the broader Wide Bay region, which again is just down the road from Rocky? What does that mean to you?
Bundaberg has been very good to me. When I moved up here, I didn't know many people. And when I came up for the specific purpose of the work contract that I did, I brought my 2 little boys with me. So it was just the 3 of us. And when I say Bundaberg has been good to me, I reached out to places where I thought I could meet people and try and, have some involvement in community outside of just work. I naturally just gravitated to certain community groups. And one of the first places I went to was the Anglican Church. And really just because I grew up as an Anglican, I went to an Anglican school. I am not someone who sits in a pew every Sunday. But I thought I'll go to the church and then that's where I actually started volunteering, and I did volunteering in the soup kitchen, and I brought my boys along to the soup kitchen, which I also wanted to do so that they had some exposure to how other people may live, which is different to us, and to be grateful for the things that we have. And so the other thing that struck me about Bundaberg was, and this was at a time where, again, like I say, the children were little, and I needed to look at schooling options. And I was just blown away by how many choices of wonderful schools we have in Bundaberg. And I chose St. Luke's, and my children have had an excellent education here. One of them did his high schooling at Shalom, and both of them are now at university and have moved to Brisbane, ironically. But, and people say, a lot of my friends say, oh, but now that the boys have gone, are you going to be moving back home? I said, no way. I love this area, and I've got my connections now. I've been here for just over 10 years. I don't want to start again. So putting them in school then exposed me to other parents at the school. And then, of course, I ended up on the school board. I started the P&F both at Shalom and also St. Luke's, and then I ended up being on the board at St. Luke's, and just sort of extended my networks through church, through school, and then now through Rotary and Zonta. So Bundaberg has been good to me, which is why I stay and why I give back. The other reason why I give back comes from my upbringing. So being raised in Brisbane to my parents who were working class. Mum wasn't a stay-at-home mum. She worked. Both of my parents worked, and they did that so that, we had a nice home and the benefit of a private school education and all of those things. But they worked very hard, but they also gave back. So when I was growing up, I always saw Dad going off to Rotary meetings, and then we would be at Rotary barbecues as a family. And Dad was also in Scouts. And so I have been exposed and a part of community organisations which are volunteer-based pretty much all of my life. So it's something that I value, and it actually brings more than people might realise. Volunteering is not just about helping other people. It's also what it can give you in terms of connection. It can combat isolation. It can expose you to skills. And I credit my now ability to be able to speak in front of a camera and on media thanks to some of the ladies in Zonta who took me under their wing and shadowed them and learned from them. So that's why I stay, and that's why I give back, because I enjoy it and I get so much out of it.
Yes.
I don't see that changing anytime soon.
No, that's fabulous. And I know there are a lot of very hardworking volunteers across my region as well as your region, and they all know exactly what you just said to be very true. And if I could encourage even just one person who's not a current volunteer to consider reaching out. And something you said earlier, about your love of the law, and it's almost like it's so enjoyable for you. One of my mentors, one of my most favourite people in the world, said to me one day, very recently, she said, find the work that everybody else sees as work, but you see as incredibly joyful fun and go and do that. So for a lot of us looking at what you do, like the law and advocacy and homelessness in particular, and working in a soup kitchen and advocating for women and girls across the world, that looks like a lot of work. And it is. We won't discount that, but it's also enjoyable because there are those moments that happen that give you connection, give you skills, give you mentorship. Yeah, I think you've just done the most amazing advocacy for volunteering in general, which is a fantastic addition.
Oh, well, thanks. And we need to be showcasing the benefits of volunteering, because as you would know, as I do, volunteering numbers are on the decline, which is very sad to see.
It is. And I could have a whole 10 series podcast on volunteering, so I'll try not to derail too much. But yes, I'm slightly worried. I know the benefit to a community of volunteers and, a community built by the community for the community. I'm never a believer that we need to rely on local government, state government or federal government to create the space we want to live, work and play in. It's up to us. Yes, maybe I'll create that 10-part series one day. Yes. So tell me either end of the scale here, but I'm always curious to know from a guest, we all have really big moments in our life that, COVID was significant, and you mentioned that one, and moving into the not-for-profit space. But we have those big moments, whether they're incredibly proud moments or devastatingly challenging. Has anything like that happened to yourself across your lifetime? And has it completely changed the direction in which you were moving?
Oh, I would have to say moving from the public service into the not-for-profit sector, because I had worked in that space for over 20 years. I know you have also done and are doing public service work, and also community and not-for-profit, etc., and small business. So you know that it's quite different. And when you go out and work for yourself, have a business like I do now, I have my own private practice as well, there are risks inherent in that. There isn't the guarantee of a fortnightly paycheck. There isn't the guarantee of compounding superannuation and all the benefits and all of those things that come with having a stable and secure job in the public service. And I did appreciate that I had that. Don't get me wrong. I was very lucky to have gone into the public service early, and being a young female in the public service as well in the very early 1990s gave me a lot of opportunities. So whilst I appreciate my time there, I must say it got to the point though where it didn't spark excitement or passion or interest anymore. So the turning point for me was taking the risk of leaving and having to back myself, and that can be difficult to do. And it's not just about self-confidence or lack thereof, because I certainly was a bit like, oh, gosh, I don't know if I could do it. And it took me some time, like I was explaining before. I reduced my hours, I took some leave. I didn't just resign one day and I'm there the next. But that for me, that was big. That was big. And I don't have any regrets, because I do love what I do, but there's always that sort of adrenaline of, my contribution and what I do is how I keep food on the table, and
Yes.
nobody else that's providing that for me at all. So that was huge. That was a huge decision for me.
Yes, that is a significant decision. And I really love the way you articulate how challenging that is. A lot of people look into small businesses or medium businesses from the outside, and they just see the outcomes, for example, or the lifestyle if there happens to be, you're in a good position for a month or two, for example. But nobody sees the self-doubt, the pressure, the ability to pay your mortgage and put food on the table is solely on what you are able to deliver and do for clients. There is no fortnightly paycheck. There is no guaranteed superannuation. So I really love how you articulate that. Thank you for sharing. There is a lot of small businesses and medium businesses who will absolutely relate to what you just said. And for you to have shared that so eloquently is very much appreciated.
Thanks.
What is the thing that keeps driving you forward every day when you wake up and you're flat and you're like, no, I'm going to keep doing this because of? And the second part to that question is, what advice would you give to young people who are navigating the world, nowhere near where you and I are at the moment, but young people particularly, what advice would you give them about, the career that they've got in front of them or the work that they've got in front of them? They might not want to have a career, for example.
Okay. So what gets me sort of that spring in my step when I get out of bed, which I do actually most days. I think it comes from a determination to be optimistic with guardrails attached, of course. But I do try to have an optimistic mindset. I think it's good for mental health reasons. And I think that just try to see the positives in things. It's healthy. It's healthy, not just mentally, but I think all over. And there's actually been a lot of scientific research about reframing how you think about things positively and some of the benefits to you personally. And also, and of course, because I love what I do. And
yes,
there have been setbacks along the way, but no different to anybody else. And I think when I do have something difficult that I need to navigate, I'm not impulsive, so I won't react immediately. I'll be very measured. I'll take my time to consider the situation. I may or may not seek some advice, whether that's professional advice or whether it's having a chat with one of my girlfriends as a sounding board. And then I will feel a bit more comfortable in the decision that I then make. But I try to approach things calmly, measured, and informed, so that keeps me enjoying the work that I do. Yeah, I don't allow myself to get all flustered and catastrophize things. In terms of younger people, whether or not they choose a pathway through, whatever vocational pathway they take, whether that's university, whether that's other forms of training or whatever it may be, I think what does cross my mind when I think of youth is authenticity and the information environment. And I just wrote an article last week in the newspaper where I have a column like yourself where we write every week about issues. And I spoke about the uniqueness of Generation X, and which I'm guessing you are. I am. Maybe you're not. But the Gen Xers are a very unique species because we have lived in the analog world and and we have pivoted and we have been able to adjust, generally speaking, adjust to both. What concerns me with youth is that they haven't experienced both. They're in a digital environment and it's so self-evident the amount of misinformation and disinformation in particular is affecting how youth behave, how they make their decisions, their choices. So my message would be very judicious in where you get your information from, who you get your information from, and how you use that information yourself.
That is fantastic advice. Yes, I am a millennial. Yes, but no, not at all, not at all. I often feel like I was born after my time, so I'll identify as a Gen X. No, yes, you've nailed everything that I worry about, to be honest. Yes, and there is so much we have available to us as parents of young people that are coming through today, and even Scout leaders of young people that are coming through today, and trying to help them navigate the world of information and what's real and what's not is quite a challenge. And if you're not a person because everyone has different strengths and benefits and assets and limitations, but if you're not a person who's aware of the world or of the information that is correct and current and from a reliable source, like what chance do you have to help these people? And that's what a lot of mainstream media and social media, they're looking for those grabs of attention, whether it's true or not, but then they don't understand, or maybe they do understand the impact, the long-term impact they are having on someone by disseminating information that's not right or shouldn't be shared or is misleading. And it's really hard to lock that down and put some policing behind it because the information is so readily spread.
And just with a legal lens to it as well, the laws have not kept up with the pace digital technology is evolving. It just hasn't.
Yes. No, and that is evident in so many different areas of law, which I don't need to tell you at all. But I've got, yes, a lot of experiences with that through advocacy and my own personal experience, where I can list two handfuls worth of examples where the law just simply can't keep up with the way the world is at the moment.
We might need to do a podcast series on that.
Yes, we might need to do a podcast series on that. So we've got volunteering, we've got, yes, the rate of change. And then, yes, I'm sure you've got some other amazing podcast ideas coming up as well. So I would really love to have you back on this podcast at some stage as well, Jo, because your work is incredibly fascinating and it's work that people need to know about.
Thank you, Nyree. I would love to be involved again.
Yes. No, and thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to watching Leveritt Advocacy explode into something that this nation needs, and watching the work that you do and staying connected, of course. But thank you so much for giving up so much of your time this morning to catch up with me.
Thanks, Nyree. My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Rockhampton with Nyree Johnson, proudly brought to you by Marketing Unagency Co., the marketing team who do things very differently and who are determined to make the world of marketing less chaotic and far clearer for small businesses and community groups.